Hi, I'm pretty excited today. We've got Payton back. You're almost like a contributing agent here. You're like a special agent for us on the agency. And you were on before to talk about a horror, Midsummer, and different things like that. I'm
Mhm.
I'm just going to let our listeners find out a little bit more about you. Payton McCarty-Simas is an author, programmer, and film critic based in New York City. They hold a master's in film and media studies from Columbia University, where she focused her research on horror film, psychedelia, and the occult in particular. Payton's writing has been featured in the Brooklyn Rail, Metrograph's Journal, Rue Morgue, Film Daze, and others, and she is the author of two books: One Step Short of Crazy, National Treasure in the Landscape of American Conspiracy Culture, and the forthcoming All of Them Witches, Fear, Feminism, and the American Witch Film, July 2025. Payne is also a member of the Online Association of Female Film Critics and GALECA, the Society for LGBTQ Film Critics. She lives with her partner and their cat, Shirley Jackson. Hey, Payton.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. We saw each other in Albuquerque at the Pop
Yes.
Culture conference, and
Mhm.
we're here to talk about the Shrouds. You're lucky you've seen it twice.
Yes. Oh my God. It's so amazing. I was really lucky to see it at the New York Film Festival, and I
Hmm.
was waiting to talk to people about it for months. So it's nice that people have finally seen it. And I saw it again a couple days ago, so it's fresh.
Fantastic. I saw it a couple days ago, and then I immediately tried to find it. I was in a small town in Wisconsin, and they just didn't have it there. And we
Mhm.
couldn't really drive to Milwaukee, but I did see it pretty fresh. I've got about 5 pages of handwritten notes. It definitely spurred some inspiration. Um, I guess we can say that it's a David Cronenberg film. It
Mhm.
it begins with a man who is a widower, and he has, listen, there's that saying, everybody grieves differently. This
Mhm.
guy, our hero, he really grieves differently. And
Yeah, sure.
he has decided that he had such an urge. He loved his wife in a way that provoked him to almost jump in her grave, that he created a device that he can watch her in her grave as she transitions or decomposes, or however you'd like to frame that.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is, do you know Stefan from SNL?
Mhm.
Yeah, Stefan, he could describe this business venture. I think he'd be like, there's a hot new club in Toronto for the goth scene. It's a graveyard with a restaurant. It's called the Shroud. So
This place has everything.
it has everything. So this restaurant, he has a restaurant that overlooks the graveyard. I don't find that completely a bad idea, actually.
I
Weird.
mean, yeah, it depends on what you're into. There's that great scene where he's talking with a doctor, and yeah, like this movie is really funny.
It
It's
is.
quite moving, but it's also hilarious where they're talking about a potential conspiracy and you see bodies being lifted behind them.
Yes. Good point. That's a great point. Well, yeah, I guess grave digging can be a felony. um,
Yeah.
Creating a grave, which we will get to in the story too. So he has this. The first scene is actually him on a blind date, and this really has to be a blind date. Well, actually, he has two blind dates, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but this first one where he decides that he's going to talk to his date about his business venture, and she makes a joke about these ninja robes on the wall,
Mm-hmm.
which does maybe underscore. I think there's some colonizing factors in here.
Mm.
I think there's so many, there's anthropology, there's archaeology, there's comparative philosophy. There's so much in this movie. I thought it was fantastic. So,
I
yeah, so maybe tell me a little bit about what you related to in the plot or the overall story of it, if
agree.
you want, if that gets us going.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think this movie is a really poignant. Like,
Hmm.
I do think it's quite a moving film about grief and aging and being a sexual being as you age, which I
Hmm.
think is really touching. There's a scene where he and his wife, it's a dream actually, but he and his wife are trying to have sex and her bones are made brittle by chemotherapy.
Hmm.
And that scene made me tear up both times I watched it. It's
Oh,
just really
oh,
lovely.
yeah, it is really lovely. I felt pretty
Mhm.
choked up too. And definitely we had an audience of about maybe 12 people in Chicago, but they were
Mm.
laughing. They were laughing
Yeah.
at a couple of different things. And I mean, so were Stag and I were laughing because there's a great sex scene where I leaned over and said, good thing they're European actors because
Mm.
it's so unusual to see a good sex scene or an interesting sex scene in a film anymore. And
Yeah.
the movie's restricted because of that, partly because of that.
Hmm.
And it stars Vincent Cassel,
Hmm.
Diane
Who I think is
Kruger.
great in the movie. I think Vincent Cassel's great, and
I
I
adore
think the
him.
reception has been pretty polarized. And that's been kind of interesting for me to watch. I have a friend who compared Vincent Cassel's performance to Tommy Wiseau in The Room, which I think is unfair.
Wow, that's so shocking. I'm
Yeah.
shocked. That's terrible. I don't read any reviews
Mm,
before I see a movie, and I try to read as least amount of production notes or press for it too. I really like to go and raw. I mean, I'm from an era where we just went to every movie in the theater. And I
mm,
mean, right now, maybe that's only teenagers that do that. They go to the
mm,
theater to hang out, and they'll see all whatever movie, even if they're not interested. And I grew up like that
mhm,
in the theater, and we just watched anything. And I had no idea there were box office failures. I
mm,
wasn't savvy at all, like culturally savvy at all. I didn't realize people, would pan a movie or just wouldn't go. It wasn't until I got older and started studying film that I found out that subtext to movie making. And
yeah.
definitely, I think this is going to be one of his, that it's going to be considered right now a bomb in a way.
Mm,
I mean, I
yeah.
know it's playing hard in New York and Toronto.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a headline, I don't remember what outlet it was in, but it was talking about how Cronenberg's movies are like sex or pizza, where it was like any Cronenberg is a good Cronenberg.
Yes,
Which is fair. I do
yes.
think like I will watch any of his films. I don't think Cosmopolis is a good film. I think it's an interesting film. I don't think it's a good film. But with this one, I think he's been canonized and lionized as the master of body horror.
Hmm.
And I think people are accustomed to a heavily anatomical frame from him. And
Hmm.
this movie is fundamentally about the body and literally the body's decomposition, but it's a very comparatively sterile film. So
Hmm.
I think people found Crimes of the Future odd, but familiar within his filmography. It picks up on all of these themes that he always plays with, and I think it was definitely, I can't call it commercial, but but more familiar.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is feels different. It's got a different tone. It's got a set of concerns for its themes that we've seen before from him, but it harkens back more to The Brood or Videodrome than it does Crimes of the Future. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And so, yeah, I did look at a couple of reviews too. And just because I don't know anyone who's seen the movie, so I definitely went on YouTube. I definitely
mm,
read reviews. And one of them was, this movie's lifeless. Ha ha ha.
mm,
So I thought that was extremely unfair. It is calm and meditative in a way of people connecting and talking, but I do not feel it was lifeless. And so that was sorrow making. I think it's Vincent Cassel is I love him. He's in a French crime film called Mesrine, and if somebody listening hasn't seen it, you really should see it. It's as good as The Godfather or Goodfellas. It's
mm.
fabulous, and he is compelling. I thought he was beautiful in this movie,
Me
and
too.
he was so beautiful that at one point there's a kind of a male sexuality in this movie that he really brings to it. He's lying in bed, and the way the camera is positioned right by his thigh,
Right.
it's a position I've seen my husband in that pose. I know what that guy was thinking in the movie. I know what the character was doing. He was aroused, he was getting aroused, or he was feeling that kind of physical love you feel for somebody in that scene. And I
And
found it compelling.
yeah, totally. No, he's very handsome, and it's a movie about sexuality where he at one point is talking to Diane Kruger plays three characters.
Yes.
She plays the wife who's deceased. She plays the wife's sister, who's a conspiracy theorist, and we'll get there. But and she also plays an AI personal assistant version who looks just like his dead wife, right? But he's talking to the sister, whose name is Terry, and he says after he's had a successful date with a woman, I was worried that I was no longer sexually viable.
Mm.
And so I do think it's really cool and nice because this is drawing from Cronenberg's personal experiences with grief and the loss of his wife. But yeah, just a frank look at being older and thinking about sexuality in the wake of losing a very long-term partner, I thought was very sweet and moving. And yeah, Cronenberg's treatment of the body is both so distanced in a lot of ways, which is part of, I think, why people are responding to a stiltedness in his filmmaking that I think is really deliberate. The deliveries of all the lines are kind of cold a lot of the time, but he also has these shocking moments of sweetness and intimacy that come through partially out of the contrast, I think, to that
Hmm.
coldness.
Hmm. I thought there was a feeling of it being more like a Lynchian film in that way, of the weird,
Mhm.
I mean, they both share weird characters and weird dialogue, and it really was successful to me. The stiltedness for me related to, well, even the word stilted must be related to still life. And we
Mhm.
have all the memento mori of skulls and bones, and we're almost watching his life. Does it? It may or may not transcend into a more emotional, active life. It looks like it does by the end of the movie, but he is living in a morgue. So
Yeah.
the stiltedness made sense to me. He's not living at the pace you and I are. He's got a different pace, but maybe something else is going to happen. We don't know by
Yeah.
the end of the movie, but there's a hint. There's
Yeah.
definitely, I think there is a hint. Um, I love the multi characters of Diane Kruger. It was just brilliant and very painful and beautifully done. Her process through being treated for cancer. I
Yeah.
thought a cat entering the room, just everyone's probably used to her coming to meow when I do a podcast. Don't see the rest of the day. Yeah. She was really good. And obviously there's mentions of, Cronenberg is meta. There's mentions and allusions to some of his other films. I didn't necessarily write them all down, but when it was happening, I was like, oh my God, Easter egg, right?
Mhm.
And possibly the fact that his wife was losing body parts could be going to the fly for sure. And how
Mm.
closely related he was to her suffering. Uh,
Yeah.
and then, of course, the obvious one I think was Vertigo, where
Yeah.
yeah, where it's even Terry, the twin sister to his wife, used to be a vet, but she has moved into the grooming area of making money grooming dogs, and she's wearing an outfit that maybe Midge would wear in Rear Window. Oh no, in Vertigo, the
Mm.
girlfriend that Jimmy Stewart could have had would have been a
Right.
very realistic girlfriend for him rather than the co-murderer, but he wasn't attracted to her, you know.
Hmm.
And then this one, he's only attracted to the sister, if he is. He seems very cautious about that and very respectful, but because of the physical look, she obviously looks identical to her sister.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is interesting. He has two different potential romantic partners in this film, and they both like everything for him is related to back to his wife in terms of his feelings of attraction, his feelings of intimacy. We learn early on from Terry, the sister, that he keeps tanking these dates,
Yeah.
potentially on purpose. He keeps having these dates where all he'll talk about is his dead wife. In the date, he shows his potential romantic partner images of his wife's decaying body, right? So he's just not interested in these other women, but he finds connection with two different women in the film. One, Terry, because they share grief at the loss of someone they were intimate with, a sister and a wife. And the other, Sue Min, who is the wife of a tech CEO, um, who is dying. And they find shared intimacy through mutual experience with grief and loss. They're only able to come together through discussions and catharsis around the slow loss of a partner to illness, which I thought was very sweet because it opens up the ability for him to talk about his grief without alienating someone else. And yeah, like in terms of Cronenberg's filmography, there's a lot of this, the erotics of necrosis, right? Like the erotics of death and decay. And this film is no different. I guess one of the questions would be thinking about Karsh as a character, what kind of love he's showing. Like there's a lot of, it's really an exploration of possessiveness in a lot of ways too, where he wants to control her body. He wants to see her body and potentially through seeing her body understand her. So as these body parts are taken away, as she begins to decay, he is trying to grasp onto a feeling of closeness to a soul that he may or may not even believe in. And you see that in the opening shot where it's, slowly panning in on her corpse, and you see a firefly over the body. And he mentions later that he chose to not cremate her because in Judaism, there's an idea that the spirit loves the body and needs time to separate itself from the body. Later on, he says I believe the line is he's a non-practicing atheist. So yeah, the tension around spirituality and the difference between like spirituality of the soul and spirituality of the body, which is very Cronenbergian, comes through here. And so much as his wife's soul may or may not be stuck on her body, so too is he very much stuck on her body.
Exactly. Exactly. Well said.
Thanks.
Yeah. Um, and the other I'm just jumping around here. We can come back to anything, but the other response I heard was people complaining on YouTube, a couple of reviewers, they seemed fairly serious Cronenberg fans. They didn't like the lean towards conspiracy theory, towards corporate
Mm,
espionage or any kind of surveillance. They didn't like that he had those storylines.
mm,
And I thought they made it so much more interesting. I mean, it was already interesting, but to me, it just added an extra thing. And that this was finished filming 2 years ago freaked me out because the main character drives a Tesla. And
yeah,
whatever they were thinking when they filmed that film, it's a completely different car now.
yeah.
And then you've got the corporate espionage, the competitive mentions of capitalism. And so
Mhm.
part of this film is about how do we treat the dead? How do we bury people? And some of the controversy is whether or not his company can go to other countries and bury, because there's going to be a protocol about whether or not this is acceptable to watch a body decay. And one of the things in anthropology that if we look at different cultures, the first thing we look at is food and burial.
Mm,
Right? Those are the things that we can walk into and that there's a record of for um, hundreds of thousands of years. The food that people ate in 70,000 years ago. So that
mm.
kind of intrigued me in his restaurant graveyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'd say to Cronenberg fan, I would remind Cronenberg fans that conspiracy is not new territory
Mm-mm.
for Cronenberg. Particularly, I'm thinking of Videodrome,
Hmm.
which combines the viewing of a female body, right, with a signal, a conspiratorial body-changing signal controlled by anonymous shady capitalists
Hmm.
to control people. It's a kind of rearticulation of a lot of what Marshall McLuhan talks about media and its relationship to society and to individuals. And I think this film, my personal take on this film is that he does a brilliant job of expressing the uncertainty we have in this particular moment around surveillance and around technology. I think it's totally brilliant. I think perhaps what makes people uncomfortable with this angle is that conspiracism is so salient to our current moment,
Yeah.
on the one hand. And on the other, I think where Videodrome is a very, very coherent text,
Yeah.
it's very thesis driven, and we know what he's saying because he says it.
Yeah.
Here, the thing that makes it work and that makes it such a good modern exploration of our current moment in relation to both conspiracy and capital, surveillance capital, is that it's not coherent.
Hmm.
It's very confusing and diffuse. And the character, both protagonists in Videodrome as in here, are very passive figures. But here the passivity is kind of the point.
Mhm.
Like this, so the conspiracy thread, my first book was about conspiracy, and I'm obviously personally very interested in it, right? But like he does such a good job highlighting the ways that we've kind of slid into surveillance capital without thinking about it or
Yeah.
without noticing or potentially without caring that much, right? And when you're watching the film, the first time you see a Tesla, for example, it kind of looks like product placement. It's a little
Yeah.
confusing. It's like, why are we seeing this? Why are we
Yeah.
here? All of the technology is Apple. Like we see iPads and we
Yeah.
see computers. We see three different iPhones. And it's like, what's going on? Like, did he need the money? No, he didn't.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Um, all of those objects become points of suspicion in the film.
Mhm.
Uh, so one of the main drivers of the plot is the fear that his graveyards, the bodies that he's been entrusted with putting to rest, are going to become nodes in a broader surveillance network that can be tapped by foreign governments. So the worry by sending bodies or by starting a graveyard like this in Reykjavik
Mhm.
or wherever else in Budapest is that the Chinese or the Russians, both of whom are mentioned specifically, will be able
Yeah.
to use these webs, these meshes, as a way to tap into the kind of Western sphere of influence. And that's not to say that the film isn't critiquing Western capital as well. It very much is, where he realizes that his shrouds are quote unquote leaky, that you can see that they're potentially going to be used for this purpose, and that he might also be a target of surveillance. It's unclear who's surveilling him and why, but he has a moment where his AI, which is another Diane Kruger avatar, may or may not be controlled by someone else. And so he shuts down his computer, he turns off his iPhone, and he goes to a drawer to find a burner phone, right? It's like a very familiar kind of noir-y
Yeah.
moment. But when he opens the drawer, you see old cameras, old cords like Ethernet cables, all of this stuff that's very much no longer, it's like anachronistic. And under all of that, he pulls out a slightly older iPhone. It's awesome. It's brilliant to me because it highlights the way that we are simply so thoroughly enmeshed
Mm.
in our current modern, like techno-capitalist
Mhm.
frame that we don't even have the real ability to disentangle ourselves in the same way we could before because he runs a tech company.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even occur to him that all of the problems that he's trying to eliminate by going off the grid with his older technology will just be synced up on the cloud to his new phone. Know what I mean? So I think it's very smart. And Karsh is a very interesting character too, because he is a tech CEO, but he's not the only tech CEO. He has a doppelganger figure in one of his lover's husbands,
Mm.
who is there's like a little kind of tacky promo video for his life, right? Which evokes your Elon Musks, it evokes your even your like Steve Jobs's. It's like this guy came up and decided that, the only way to move forward as a global village is to create new technology that will, make humans more advanced as a society. And so you have that figure who's very familiar, but Karsh isn't exactly like that. He, we learn, used to be quote unquote a maker of industrial videos.
Mm.
And he seems to have moved into this kind of tech startup space later in life after his wife's death. But he doesn't know how anything works. He's not an innovator per se. He relies on other people to build his shrouds, to bury people. He has no idea what's going on. So he's kind of a traditional noir protagonist in that way, but made very passive in a kind of like kiss me deadly kind of a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Um, and that's really interesting to me that he, like the pornographer in Videodrome, is kind of a patsy for people around him. Yeah, and that comes through in a lot of different ways.
It does, and it comes through a little bit with the second woman, the second blind date. She is literally blind,
Mm,
and she has a seeing eye dog, And then you think about as a visual artist, it's something I've thought about over the years. It's weird. I make visual art, and yet there's people out there that are blind, and I feel like an asshole or something, you know? So there's a weird kind of thing I thought about that with him being an artist and loving a blind woman. And
Mm.
um, and they have a connection. She has to feel his face, and like you said, that they find some mutual understanding in grief. And it's
Mm.
Sandrine Holt, who's a wonderful Canadian actress. I love her.
Mm.
And I think that really adds something to it, and it makes me think, what's with the dogs?
Mm.
Dogs are really our dependable, loyal, friendly companions in world, maybe. Is that it? And they
Mm.
are all concerned with connection. They want to,
Yeah.
humans want to be connected. Even bad guys want to feel connected.
Mm.
If they're about
Mhm.
to kill their serial killer victims, they still are all about being connected with their trophies and their marks.
Mm.
That was weird too. Um,
Yeah, the dogs. I mean, we have several dogs in this film. We have Sumin, who is a seeing eye dog, and then we have Terry, who started out as a veterinarian, as a surgeon, a veterinary surgeon, right, which is very Cronenbergian.
yeah.
And then she decides to stop being a surgeon because she was having trouble with some of the pet owners, which I think is a good parallel to Karsh's difficulty dealing with illness and death. So she switches to being a dog groomer,
Mhm.
because she wants to make things beautiful. That's what she says. She likes the intimacy of just being with a dog, making it happy, taking them for a walk. And so both of his new lovers are directly associated with dogs, which I suppose would be, if I had to kind of armchair it, just a contrast to the kind of coldness of the technology he surrounds himself with. During a sex scene with Terry, she asks him where Sumin's seeing eye dog goes when they have
Right.
sex. Yeah.
This sex scene is so cringy because of their dialogue. It's
It's
really
raw. It's really cool.
It's
Like,
really cool
talking
though,
about,
because it's a very powerful sex scene. In one way, I found it really enlivening and exciting, you know, and just as a viewer, of course, I'm not immune to a sex scene, but it was also stops you in a way because of the things he say.
yeah, it's very, yeah, it's just very raw.
Right. What does she say again? She's like, oh yeah, where does the dog sit when you guys are having sex? Yeah.
Yeah. And he says that they put down a towel and the dog watches them. Um, and then at a different point, right before they have sex, Terry says that she only decided to have sex with him when she saw him and Sue Min at the dog park. And
Hmm.
he says, thank God for dogs then. So they do represent a kind of animalistic, emotional, instinctive
Mhm.
connection,
Mhm.
that you don't see otherwise. And at another point, Karsh says to Sue Min that he wants to be her seeing eye dog for the week. He wants to be her dog, right?
Right?
So,
Yes,
yeah,
there's a fetish thing in there, and the sex scene is doggy style too. So there's
so true.
they could have done it in a different position, but I know they were having fun with that. To my cringe level of conversation, I mean, it was like the worst dirty talk on the planet. That's all I can say. But for them, it obviously was incredible. They were hitting all the notes they needed.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah,
getting
it was
that out.
cathartic. It was like the only point during the movie they could be really frank with each other, which actually brings me back to the question of erotics and what turns these characters on.
Yes.
There's a lot of conversation about what turns people on. And it's not just about transgression, as that scene might imply, where they're talking about she's talking about her dead sister and whether he thinks that she looks like him, right? And looks like her, and he's talking about his dead wife. They're talking about his other lover. So there's a lot of frankness going on there. But the other through line, is that Terry has a conspiracy fetish.
Yes.
She turned on by conspiracies. The weirder they are, the hotter she gets.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another, people criticized, going back to what you were saying about YouTube, people
Yeah.
criticized the conspiracy plot for being too unrelated to the
Mm,
grieving plot.
mm.
And Cronenberg had a great line during an interview where people were like, "What do you think about this? How do you feel that people are saying these aren't related?" And he said, "That's stupid."
And that is stupid. First of all, I think that there's probably some work already done about conspiracy theory, that it does excite a part of your brain. I certainly, when I hear not contemporary conspiracies aren't cool anymore. The old ones were really cool, about JFK, or did
Mhm.
someone kill Bob Marley? Was it Jeb Bush? I mean, those are cool conspiracy theories. The ones we have now are kind of like meh. But there is, I have to understand everybody has different tastes, but I think there is some kind of a paradigm shift with a conspiracy theory. And in fact, that the book I've mentioned, and you've heard me mention it at conferences, by Arthur Verslewis, is American Gnosis. And he's talking about that these conspiracy theories, when people are they're going through a first level of almost Plato's cave. And
Mm,
they're having an awareness, oh shit, the government isn't there for me. Oh shit, the retirement home isn't there for me. The
mm,
bank's not there for me. We probably already knew that from the 30s, right? But that maybe your medical system isn't there for you. So they get this awakening, and then they feel that's it. They're awake, they're enlightened. They don't realize in Plato's cave there's another cave, right? Or
mm.
in a spiritual journey, there's always another layer. But
Right.
I think that there's some reality to that conspiracy theory being erotic on
Yeah.
some level. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to pull in a couple of different theoretical frames, there are two thinkers named Claire Burchell and Peter Knight who do a lot of work on conspiracy, who say that since the 60s, which is a moment of really popular conspiracy theory, there's been a shift in conspiratorial thinking, that they're calling gamified. They say that
Oh.
it's turned into something that's more playful. It's like blending entertainment and politics in a way that's really familiar for us today. So conspiracy becomes something that you can play with. You go down a rabbit hole because it interests you.
Mhm.
Um, and that same thing takes you away from a desire purely to know things, like to reach a resolution, and
Mhm.
into a different frame where the uncovering of knowledge becomes an end unto itself. So it turns into something that's more a drive than necessarily a desire for an answer. On top of that, I'd say that like the human brain loves to make connections. It's called apophenia.
Mm.
And so yeah, there's definitely it just lights up your brain like a Christmas tree to make these associative
Yeah,
connections.
there you go.
Um,
Thank you.
of course, in terms of what you were saying about current conspiracy theory being less interesting or conspiracy being, there's something there because the idea that conspiracy theory used to be cool,
Hmm.
at least from a left perspective,
Yes.
speaks to something else that's come up right now that I think might sour people a little bit on this film, which is what they're calling the crank realignment, which is conspiracy used to be very left-leaning.
Hmm.
If you saw like, a granola yoga mom, she was much more likely to be a 9/11 truther from the left than she was likely to be like a member of QAnon or something like, so like the associations have moved. And it's much more right associated now. That's not to say that being a 9/11 truther is a good thing. It's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
But it is to say that the valence used to be more liberal and now it's
Yes.
more conservative. Like anti-vax granola moms are now, they went from RFK left coded to RFK right coded.
Correct. Correct.
And yeah, so it's definitely hard. It can be hard or alienating to watch these characters contend with these kinds of conspiracy, right? Like there's um there's a through line in the film uh around Asian characters and Asian things, right? That's very, it's exploring the racism of a lot of conspiracies, right? Like if you see an Asian character in the film, somebody's gonna say something
Mhm.
about how that character is Chinese, and that means they're up to something, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like there's discomfort there, but that's being explored on purpose. So
So true. And of course, they do mention China as being one of the concerns, right? You
mhm,
mentioned that China and Russia. And the shrouds themselves seem almost like an Asian kimono turned into a cocoon.
mhm,
There's a kind of a cultural appropriation sense there too. Like it's really a cool shroud. But is it cool that we took something like a kimono or whatever and padded it and made it for a body? Maybe people are buried in their kimonos in the world. But yeah, there was it's not totally that, but there's a just a weird feeling of like definitely grave robbing and some of the blended conspiracy theories do make me think about colonization and the
Mhm.
tone of disregard for other countries, like you said.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, Obviously
And the
not all of.
Shrouds,
Hmm?
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I'm good.
Just in terms of what you were saying about the Shrouds,
Yeah.
as someone describes them as ninja suits at
Yes,
one
he
point.
does. The blind date at the beginning. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Karsh's apartment, he has also just remodeled to be Japanese.
Yes, yes.
Yes. And when Terry asks him about it early on in the film, he says that he wanted to change and that he wanted to become someone else. So there is very much a through line of appropriation of Asian cultures in particular. Sumin is half Korean and half French, he
Yes,
says when someone
yes,
asks if she's Chinese.
yes, yes.
His shrouds are manufactured in China. The people who set up his cameras are Chinese, and the doctor who who handled the not the radiation itself, but the X-rays for his wife, Becca, is Asian. Someone says he's Chinese. We don't know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I do think the question of appropriation is present, and I think they're using kind of a broadly generic Asianness also just as a way of touching on the kind of Silicon Valley thing we have going on, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like this blend of like Eastern philosophy and hyper-capitalism.
Yeah.
That's very uncritical, the whole like mindfulness Zen thing that they all have going on.
Yeah.
That Karsh does not think about at all because he's not an active or reflective guy. He's just kind of picking up stuff
Well,
in the air.
yeah, that's a great insight there, especially that he's part of it and he's part of the consumer and he's also trying to be a seller as well. He wants to sell to other cultures. And obviously, when you go to another culture, and I mean a real other culture, not just a dominant industrial culture like ours, um, you're going to have protocols that you can't pass with watching people in the grave or building graveyards. And it is a little bit like all of our corporations wanting to sell to other people because they run out of the pyramid scheme in your own country. You've got to expand that pyramid scheme to another country. And in some ways, I've wondered, is he a good guy or a bad guy? He
Mm,
may be a bit of both. Maybe he's not good or bad in that sense, but maybe in the film noir sense. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, where you
Yeah.
need to be both. Because I don't like it that I was shocked that he drove a Tesla, but I thought it was hilarious. But then I found out Cronenberg drives a Tesla.
That's interesting.
Yes, and he has AI in his hearing aids, and he said it's fantastic.
Huh.
So I
Yeah,
was
no.
quite disappointed.
I mean, Cronenberg's philosophy on technology, as we can tell from his films, is an interesting one. He just did an interview in Interview Magazine where he talks about the fact that he thinks of technology as part of human evolution,
Yes.
like a different form of evolutionary adaptation, which you get with Crimes of the Future, where it's like you eat microplastics, so you develop new organs or whatever it is. The Videodrome signal causing these mutations in your body, whatever it is. Even talk therapy in The Brood is presented as a technology in
Hmm.
a kind of McLuhanite sense, and that therapy then makes you mutate. So he's talked about the fact that like the phone is a way to export part of your memory system. And I think it just depends on your personal level of tolerance, whether you like this frame or not. I personally am not a fan of that
Yeah.
framing, but
Yeah.
you can see it in the films. I think if he's more his position on tech, this is a very tech skeptical film.
Yeah.
He's not arguably not a very moralistic filmmaker, so it's not necessarily framed as a bad thing that Karsh wants to fetishistically watch his wife decay in 8K resolution.
Hmm.
But the technology that Karsh uses, generally speaking, is presented, as I was saying with the iPhone earlier, as kind of a an all-encompassing trap for him. And the Tesla thing, you see Teslas drive themselves in several scenes.
Hmm.
And it's to me, it read very much as a kind of pacifier, as a way
Hmm.
to lose control of your life, right? Where one character who may or may not be trusted tells Karsh, like, don't worry, I programmed my location into your car. Just let your car drive you to me, right? So where in a lot of films, characters themselves are actors of and on the plot,
Hmm.
Karsh is not. He is
Hmm.
carried along by technology throughout the film. So it is interesting to know that Cronenberg has a Tesla. I wonder if that's a reflection of him. I wonder whether he feels carried by technology or whether he thinks that he's carrying it. That'd be interesting to ask him.
It would be interesting. I think that he does see it as a very human part, and he doesn't see it necessarily as a threat. Maybe some it is. And maybe that's the ultimate, is that we ought to be aware, like the Amish, to decide what technology we want in our lives and what we don't. And
Mm,
maybe we have some autonomy on that, but maybe we don't have that much because so
mm,
many things change so quickly. You said how one technology came up so quickly about surveillance. AI came up so quickly on most people. We
yeah,
might have known about it 10 years ago, but for it to all of a sudden be in everybody's phone. I mean,
yeah.
I'm editing a film and I bought a film program that didn't have AI in it. I
Mm,
can option it. I can go and buy an add-on to it, but I had to phone the company and say, I need you to promise me there's no AI in here. They thought I was
mm.
crazy. And I said, oh no, tell your designers I'm dead against this.
Good for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna fight the good fight. Yeah, but and I could be wrong. It's there is something about this passive thing, and it is about identity and consciousness. I think it's related to it because he hooks up with um his new investor, perhaps in Budapest, his potential the blind I forgot her character name,
Suman.
Subin, and she can't see him, and in a way is that allowing him to not be the person he was because he's not seen in a way he can be something. Is that expanding his perspective almost? I could see that permitting him. And then the dog watching them have sex allows the dog to accept who he is in his lover's life in a weird way. It's like,
Mm,
oh, well, I got to be nice to this guy. She likes him. Um,
right.
very much likes him. And considering he probably watched her husband and her have sex, maybe there was a
Yeah.
territorial thing there.
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
her blindness is it is a question what it connotes. I mean, there's a moment when they're first meeting where she's playing Karsh a voice note from her husband who's dying, and it plays on her phone at
mm,
like 40 times speed. And he's like, I can't understand this. Why is it playing this fast? And she says, I'm sorry, when you're blind, your ears go into overdrive,
mm.
right? Which builds back into what we were talking about with Cronenberg and the idea of tech as an adaptation. For the record, that's not a thing.
No.
But it is interesting that she represents through this older form of technology having a service dog and these kind of odd newer forms of technology, the fact that her ears have rapidly adapted to hear things
Yeah.
faster,
Yeah.
a kind of cyborg figure that's very familiar to Cronenberg. But when they talk about her blindness, she she says that it's ironic that she can't actually see the videos that the shrouds are
Mm,
designed for, and makes a joke about haptic technology, maybe the ability to feel the decayed person. And
mhm.
he says, yeah, we should do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's just a credulous character.
Yeah. And that's similar to the Crimes of the Future in that you get this wonderful thing from Cronenberg that people aren't judgy about each other and they're not judgy about what they need to feel human. And I will say, oh, I wanted to say quickly too, the one thing I did think was that the next day after the movie, I'm driving around, I went, oh my God, I feel alive. So the
Mm,
weird part was I had this huge appreciation of being alive after the movie. It's
yeah.
still a little bit with me. It's a little bit, a grateful thing. I wanted also to throw out there body horror. Um, the whole thing with body horror is its fear of death. All
Yeah.
of body horror is feeding on our fear of death. And that's partly why he's always taken that limit in most of his films. Is like, let's if it doesn't have life and death, it's not worth making, almost,
Mm,
And then
yeah.
how do we live and how do we feel alive?
Yeah. He has that great line about how all of his films are about that Latin phrase. Do you remember what it was? That just means death disturbs me.
I don't remember what it was. I know we mentioned it in in Albuquerque.
Albuquerque. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't remember what it was. Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, death
Might be
disturbs
from, I think it might be from Valerie or Virgil. It's one of the V's
me.
in my mind. Um,
And
and
yeah, death certainly disturbs Karsh. Like that's the whole thing. But it's not just death itself, it's the lack of knowledge of death and the lack of control he feels over the medical realm, right? Where like in his nightmares, his wife is slowly losing body parts and she has this color in his dreams that alerts her surgeons of when she needs to be taken away. And he's always asking what's going on and she's not able to tell him, right? So the fear of death there translated into I simply don't know what's happening in my wife's body. I can't control it. I can't understand it. Doctors can control it, or they can't ultimately control it, but they can work to ameliorate it because they understand what's going on. And so that tension is really at the heart of the film's conspiracies. And we talked about this in Albuquerque, right? But he's talked about the fact that the reason, going back to his great line about how it's stupid to say they're not connected, the reason he thinks they are connected is because for him, conspiracy is what he calls a grief strategy. And that's what this film is about. It's about finding a way to contend with dying, with grief, by making connections that feel satisfying, even if they're not correct. The
Mhm,
act of uncovering unto itself is a solution. And it's kind of a necrophile solution, which is where you get the images of the body decaying, because
mhm.
you're making it feel, you're forcing the feeling of understanding on a process that is fundamentally unknowable.
Yes, yes. And I think that's the driving force in many of his movies again, is that grief is so related to loss. It could be a loss of your, listen, as a parent, you lose your children when they're 8, 9, 10 years old. They may still obviously still to live the rest of your lives, but you never have that back again. And there is a kind of grieving in there in your heart all the time, that you miss that, where you're kind of the one who takes them out or comes up with ideas of things to do. And now they're not looking to you for that anymore, which is good, which is what you were doing. Your job is done, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and this part where you don't feel at peace in the world, and religion usually tells you what to do about death, but his
Mhm.
characters aren't interested in that. Maybe his wife was, but he's not interested in that, how to make me not afraid of death, you know?
Yeah. And Judaism is a big theme in this film.
Yeah.
His wife, Becca, was Jewish. His Terry, the sister, is Jewish. And Terry's husband, played by Guy Pearce, whose name is Maury, is
Mm-hmm.
Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And Judaism in the films of Cronenberg is its own fascinating can of worms. But yeah, like religion is presented as dissatisfying. They play into or play around with Cronenberg is was raised Jewish. They play around with questions of anti-Semitic conspiracy in this film in a way that might make people uncomfortable, right? Like Maury's character, who's this little tech nerd guy, is always eating matzo ball soup and
Oh yeah.
like calling people schmucks, and it's stereotyped in a way that I think, much like all of the Asian fetishism, is meant to kind of poke something
Mhm.
in the culture that's uncomfortable. But yeah, Cronenberg and religion, he's never been very interested in it. He finds his own ways to deal with it. But spirituality, like the spirituality of corporeality, is definitely of interest to him for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, and it's something interesting with the restaurant in the graveyard, and that
Mm,
eating has a facet in this. In medieval culture, I believe they felt that there was some kind of magic if you ate corpses. Not everybody, but there were people who did it. It was looked down upon, obviously, but it did have some kind of healing notion to it. And
Mhm.
you've got this food. So to me, the body horror in the film was the sound of the brother-in-law eating and the sister-in-law eating.
Mhm.
I was plugging my ears because I have misophonia. I don't like listening
Mhm.
to people eat. So I was like, this is a nightmare for me. And kind of brings me around to something I don't know the answer of, or you might have an idea. Here
Mhm.
you've got these graves, and we have such a, we're worried about the government having surveillance, but here we have invasion of privacy. Um, on top of this man or their family members taking their bodies, do they have permission to watch them after death? Did their loved one agree to this? I don't know if we know. And is this love or is this abjection?
Yeah, we definitely don't know. He never says whether Becca gave him permission. Becca becomes a tool of his business, right? The graves are ransacked. That's the inciting event. And someone who works for him asks if they're going to re-hook up Becca's feed, and he says he has to because if he doesn't, then the company will suffer.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, it does become kind of a capitalist imperative instead, like a node in an enterprise instead of a private moment of grief. The feeds are hijacked. And so early on when he's on that blind date, he tells the woman that only you have access to the feed from your gravesite, but that is immediately disproven. It's leaky. It's not, there's no privacy
mhm,
online.
mhm,
It's not feasible. It's deliberately made
mhm,
almost impossible to do.
mhm.
So there's that angle. But in terms of whether it's an act of love, I think it's an act of possessiveness. I think that's where we're supposed to come down on it. And like it's from a place of love, but his love is all consuming and deeply obsessive and destructive. And Terry doesn't want to look at the grave cam. I think it's called grave cam,
Yeah, it
shroud,
is.
whatever.
Yeah, Shroud
Yeah,
Cam.
doesn't
Yeah.
want to look because she thinks it's wrong. But yeah, the abject sight of the body, he says it's comforting.
Mhm.
But I think it's just a way to feel connected to someone who's no longer present.
I do too, and I guess I'm going to say it's a corruption. It's a corruption of our emotions. And you said a few words. One, you said all-consuming, and you said
Mm,
feed that we use in technology. We've got feeds into here, so there's got to be a pun on that. And you said company, and we're
mm,
back to connections. So all
mm,
of those things is the kind of language we use for things that are extremely corporate. This is the corporatization of grief
mhm,
in a way. And it's I mean, I guess it's always been there. We definitely have corruption in graveyards in the United States where people didn't bury the bodies or whatever, scandals like that. But that it instead of it being connected to a community of ritual or a community of protocols, it's not unlike mindfulness or yoga today. Yoga has been separated from a community, and you're never supposed to pay for yoga. Yoga is
mm,
something that someone teaches you. You exchange, it's an oral tradition. And
mm,
the same with mindfulness. It's not supposed to be just mindfulness on its own. It's mindfulness with 10,000 years of research. But now
mm,
mindfulness is without that research. So we want a kind of immortality, but the immortality that he wants, which with these graves, is for something that is feeding the ego rather than feeding the spirit or feeding the consciousness. And it's literally not feeding her consciousness as far as we know. And he's an atheist, so he must not know that. But it's feeding his consciousness.
mm,
It's a weirdest thing, and it does make me think about a lot of things in society that our dream of the transhuman now is the transhuman that can keep buying Teslas and Apple TVs and live forever, serving their selfhood. If
mm,
you in most mystical practices, you experience who you really are and you already know you're immortal. It's such a reverse. It's not in the material world, it's in the emotional world, right?
mm,
So it just that all of those things came to my mind or were underscored in it too. And I do care a lot about the main character, whose last name is Relic.
mm.
which is
Mm,
pretty funny for an old man, right? An old white man. He's a relic in our society. Um,
mm.
yeah, that's
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, it makes me think about the AI personal assistant who looks just like his wife.
Yes.
It reminds me, and her name is Honey.
Hmm.
Um, right. So she's just this little sweet, supportive iteration of she's designed to say nice things to him and look like his wife. And she obviously goes rogue. She's a little bit suspect. We don't know what's going on with her. But it is interesting. It reminds me of the current technology on offer where you can create an AI generated version of your deceased loved one.
Yeah, I
Um,
heard Cronenberg
another
talking about
metaphor
that.
for him.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
talking about that on a great YouTube interview. Yes, I was so alarmed. I don't think I thought of that. Certainly, we saw with Facebook when someone passes away. I've got friends that have died, and their Facebook page keeps living. And it's a weird thing. You go on there and maybe you say happy birthday. I don't know. It depends on who you are. Maybe you
Yeah.
share a picture. So this is an extension of that for sure that we can put together all of the images. I mean, I think about what I have on my family. I could
Mm.
create an avatar of, but much better than an avatar.
Yeah, it's quite disturbing. And no, in terms of I'm just playing out I'm taking the Shrouds to its logical
Yeah.
conclusion, the Shrouds technology, right? Where he's still in a moment where he can watch his wife's body decay.
Hmm.
But eventually, all that's going to be left is her bones, right? It's not a process that can continue forever. I mean, I suppose her bones will crumble, right? But like that kind of necrotic drive he's experiencing can't last forever. So
Mm.
it's all kind of self-defeating in that sense.
That's so true. That's so true. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could paint them. You could preserve them, mummify them, I guess. I mean, that's the other
Mm,
thing. It's kind of cool that it's like a mummy.
mhm,
Yeah. I wondered if it was a death dream. You know that argument of vertigo possibly being a death dream, that the whole thing happened in his head while he was dangling from a building. I wasn't sure, Peyton, when he went on that private jet. Is he alive still? I didn't know. I mean, I have to see it again, obviously, because it kind of was all like, and I was not drinking before I saw it. I was very sober. But there were so many things going through my head that I was like, please try to remember all this. Um,
mm,
I do
yeah,
like the remake thing.
mm,
As artists, I've drawn stars since I was 14. I put them in almost all my artwork.
mm,
And, Cronenberg has his motifs that he loves. Hitchcock had some of his. And in a way, the Vertigo wasn't just about controlling, it was about, and I see this with the dead bodies and the corpses in the shrouds. And I was talking about this in Albuquerque about the remake culture we have in Hollywood. And there's this kind of weird sense of like how it could be his art that's coming to an end too. He's not going to be seen. He doesn't when the character's worried about being sexually viable, certainly an older artist is worrying about being culturally viable.
mm,
You know,
mhm,
obviously you live in Manhattan and most of the artwork and up and coming artists, they're always like between 25 and 30. So I never thought, how am I going to feel when I'm older looking back and going, oh, that door's closed. Nobody gives a shit about an old lady's artwork?
huh,
I think there's something that you don't know if your finger's on the pulse. Certainly, I would say this film proves his finger is on the pulse
definitely.
in ways that he couldn't have predicted.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting that the character started out making industrial videos. He's not an artist per se, although I think
True.
he does refer to the shrouds as a kind of artistic practice of its own. But he compares them to the Shroud of Turin, going back to religion, right? Where
Mhm.
he says that his shrouds are his invention.
Yes.
Uh, somebody and they say like, "Oh, have you heard of the Shroud of Turin?" And he said, "That was definitely a fake. Mine are real."
Yeah.
So the idea of like religious revelation through an imprint on something is definitely artistic, but yeah, he is through and through kind of a journeyman.
Hmm.
Um, of technology, industrial videos, presumably for other people to promote technology. Is kind of a vector through which information is past. But yeah, there's so much of Cronenberg himself in the film. It is quite interesting that you have this kind of from being a an artist of some sort to
Mhm.
being a CEO.
Yes.
Um, it's yeah, there's a lot going on there in terms of what's going on today.
And again, another good metaphor for Hollywood, right? Where
Hmm.
it is a machine, it's so much money. I thought about the movie Cocoon because these shrouds look like a cocoon when you put them on. They don't look very comfortable for a living person. And I was
Yeah.
laughing about that because there was a very famous popular movie called Cocoon about
Mm.
aging in the 80s. And
Yeah.
they got a boost of energy and they didn't have arthritis anymore. They didn't get younger, but they didn't feel, old. Um,
Right.
yeah. What about the environmental concern? Was there much mention of that on your second viewing? Because I suppose that would be part of the problem of going to Budapest in China. And although I can't say that those industrial company countries are going to be very concerned about environmental burials, because there is a whole subtext of environmentalism with
Hmm.
how's the best way to treat the dying that also helps the earth.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many like I'm trying to go through this whole conversation without any major spoilers, right?
Oh, I
But
wasn't caring. I say free form. No, no, no. I think it's okay. I don't think anyone's going to remember.
Uh, but yeah, there are so many different through lines. It's a great conspiracy film because there are so many different red herrings and potential options, right? Where it's like, is it China? Is it Russia? Is it Mori?
Hmm.
Is it doctors?
Hmm.
Is it eco-terrorists, right? So they you go through and like to me, I feel like the eco-terrorism plot was one of the red herrings in the film, but it is a relevant thing to bring up, right? Where it's like you have these Icelandic eco-terrorists who believe that the shrouds are immoral, that the shrouds themselves will not only are they leaky in a data sense, but these people are worried that they're leaky in an environmental killing way. Chemicals into the ground, you have imagery from Viking burials in the hack, right? So it's like so much going on there. I think that in terms of Cronenberg's filmography and concerns, it makes sense that eco-terror would come up in this film. Because technology is not only altering the human body, it's altering the environment in which humans are, making radical changes. But at the same time, there's an eco-terrorist character who talks about how when he was younger, he went up to a volcano to film it for a project, and the sulfur in the air destroyed his esophagus. So I think looking at the kind of broader thing with Cronenberg, he's kind of positing that whatever occurs is, whether it's technological or natural, is part of the same broader matrix of like humanity's relationship to the surrounding world.
Yeah, that
Um,
makes sense. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that does make sense. He said in this interview that he had actually planned, and maybe you've probably heard this, that he had planned a mini series for Netflix with this
Oh, yeah.
originally, and there was going to be a whole episode in with the eco terrorists in Iceland. I think that there is a lot that you could have done with it, but they just, without saying, he figured they couldn't give him the money. I mean, that
Yeah.
it would be very expensive. He wanted to film in 8 different countries. And they're like, oh, we can't do that right now. And he's pretty sure it was because of the money. But I think
Yeah.
he did succeed in a vision that he had for 8 hours or 8 episodes. He did find a great way to put it all into a movie, and
Yeah.
I think all of Cronenberg's movies are better the second, third, fourth time you see them. There's
Mm,
so many little digs in there and metaphors and puns that sometimes
mhm.
you can't see them on the first viewing. And
Certainly.
I do think he's an unreliable interview. I
Yeah.
love his interviews, but yeah, we talked about this too before when you and I were on the panel. We're like, I don't think we can really trust him when he says
Yeah.
it. And why should we? We shouldn't be asking artists some of these questions. I think
Mm.
that's the mystery, is we're supposed to go in and find out ourselves. And
Yeah.
and and because he said, okay, he drives a Tesla. Maybe he didn't say whether he regretted that now. He
I
didn't say,
think he likes to mess with people.
I think he
Um,
does. He's a shit
like
disturber.
yeah, he's just a little trickster god of his own making, I think, where there was an interview that one of my friends got to see, a Q&A. I'm so jealous, but he
Me
was
too.
right, like that'd be so cool. But he was talking about how he likes digital cameras better than film cameras, and he was like, film cameras look terrible. I like
Mhm.
watching movies at home. Like,
Mhm.
movie theaters are no big
I
deal.
heard that.
Right? And you can almost feel the film community's heads spinning, steam coming out of their ears, which I think is part of the point. I think he just likes messing with everyone.
Yeah. And sometimes, it's like devil's advocate. You say something, you're going to spark a conversation, and maybe he does like what. Listen, it's great to watch a movie at home.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. But I will say that when we went downtown and we hadn't been downtown together for a while. We went downtown. We didn't hang out. We saw the city, we saw people. We went to a grown-up movie. It's a
Hmm.
grown-up movie. We had to put clothes on to go out and watch it and be polite in public. Not just in our home with food falling on our laps and
Yeah.
oh my God, I felt like I had just taken a shot of adrenaline or something. I
Yeah.
just felt like I'm so grateful to his history of movies that are so unusual, so unique. I mean, this storyline is impressively imaginative.
Certainly.
It's just mind-blowing imaginative, and I think it will be better for a younger generation in a future generation. I think it'll be more meaningful. I think maybe some of his fans are just they're too used to him.
Mm.
He did not have to go very far to write this movie from where
Yeah.
we are today. It's like the world has caught up to Cronenberg in this movie. I mean, you think how far-fetched Videodrome was. You can certainly look at the history of why it was made then. But you can, because, movies were coming on TV, restricted movies were being shown on TV. But you can see how closer and closer and closer. This could have been set next year.
Yeah.
It
And the way we're going, it's only going to get more salient.
seems like
No,
it.
we need Cronenberg.
We do
I
need
think this
Cronenberg.
world needs Cronenberg. And that's part of why he's been growing in kind of respectability over the past couple of years, is because he's so brilliant
Mhm.
and such a good satirist of our modern world, such a good commentator on it. He's curious about it in a way that I think a lot of us aren't. And his lack of inherent techno skepticism, his kind of techno agnosticism, I think is
Yes.
a boon to his filmmaking.
Yes.
Um, which is why I've been so sad about the reception of this film,
Mm.
because there is so much going on here and there's so much to say. And if a piece of art leaves you feeling weird, there's something going on. But I think it's kind of it's one of those things where you can watch this movie on any level. It will meet you where you are. If you
Yeah.
want to see it as a kind of weird, kind of goofy
Mm.
farce mystery, then sure, yeah, that it's a distanced film. So
Yeah.
you have to engage with it as much as you want to. But it has so much to offer. So I'd really recommend it for people who haven't seen it.
I would too. I would really recommend it too. In fact, it's one of the first Cronenberg's films I've recommended to a girlfriend of mine who normally I wouldn't say for her to watch a
Mm,
body horror film. She wouldn't be here. I said, there's something about this, and it's got the topic of grief and sensuality and the body and technology. It's working on, like you said, so many levels you can approach it. I mean, you definitely could do literary criticism about 20 subjects on this film.
mhm.
It's going to be very ripe for essays and future work. Um, Peyton, maybe you should come back on and talk about your Nicolas Cage book.
I
I
love
want to,
talking about National Treasure,
okay,
so
because we want people to buy National Treasure. Go get Peyton's book, especially if you're a Nick Cage fan. I really think you've got to get it. And I'm so glad you were here today.
thank you for having me on.
I'm excited. You inspire me. You're an incredible thinker, free thinker, and I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure talking.
All right, talk to you soon.